Hello and welcome to the Celtic Way morning briefing. It's a hat trick of hosting days by yours truly for you unfortunate people, but I am at least joined by Alison McConnell today. How's it going, Alison?
Not too bad, thanks. Sean, yourself?
Yeah, fine and dandy, aye. So today it's that midweek spot where the game's still a few days away. The last game was a few days ago. But what we do have to talk about is international call-ups or lack thereof. So I want to start with words I absolutely didn't think I'd be uttering when we started this back in the summer. Anthony Ralston deserved to stay in the Scotland squad, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he might feel a bit sore that he didn't make the cut. I think that Steve Clarke is fairly loyal to players that he's had in and players that he's worked with before. And I think maybe just the fact that Anthony Ralston has started some games for Celtic, but maybe not just quite cemented a regular first team place has cost him. But I think he'll probably feel quite hard done by not to have made the cut.
I mean, he's started. Well, he's not started. He's played almost 40 games, and since that, I mean, he was in the squad, obviously the Scotland squad the last time. So you could argue he was in the squad, so to get taken out, it was kind of harsh. He made his debut in that impressive 2-0 win over Denmark, albeit it was for 4 minutes and it left wing back. But since then, he's played 15 more games for Celtic, the majority of those being full 90 minutes. He's took his goals and assist tallies to 5 and 7, respectively, and he's performed well generally in defence as well, I would argue. So very little for me has actually changed for him since then. I think you could argue that Ange Postecoglou's kind of made it clear that in the bigger games he will pick Juranovic over him, but I don't think that's necessarily a slight because Ralston's still been playing. And I mean, that said, to give Steve Clarke the benefit of the doubt, I mean, with Greg Taylor returning to his own spot in the Scotland squad after injury and Aaron Hickey getting included for the first time and with his kind of versatility to play on both sides, you can start to see why Clarke maybe felt he couldn't find a place for Ralston. I would argue it's actually the opposite flank that you look at for the lack of logic, though. I would argue it's been that way since last summer. Obviously, the two right backs that are there, not including Hickey as a right back, he might play there, he might not, but the two right wing backs there are Stephen O'Donnell and Nathan Patterson. To me, I don't know what you think about him, but Stephen O'Donnell is a hard worker. All those qualities that kind of endear him to people as an underdog type character also bring him a lot of criticism as well. But he's trusted by Steve Clarke and all the rest of that. And I think he's actually been okay for me. He's not as bad as people like to make out. What's your thoughts on O'Donnell? Is that the kind of obvious person you would have thought it was between?
Yeah, yes and no. I think I would agree with you. I think very much he has the confidence and faith and assurance of Steve Clarke. I think that's evident by the games that he's been picked for, the caps that he's got. I think he probably holds the position. I think Nathan Patterson was probably the bigger surprise for me just because he's not been playing regularly. Whereas I think if you look at Ralston, he's making a fairly telling first team contribution. So I think I expected him maybe just to have jumped the queue in terms of selection for that role. I think it would maybe seem like a more sensible option to have someone who's been exposed to regular first team football. I think Patterson is struggled maybe just with the jump from Scottish football going down to the Premier League. I think he's had very little game time, and obviously I think you know that Frank Lampard said that they maybe just need to coach him along a bit, get him up to speed. I'm sure he will go on to be a very good player for Scotland. I think Nathan Patterson does have a lot of qualities there. I think you've seen them. I think he looks like quite a precocious player. I think there is definitely a big future for him at international level. At the minute, I think Ralston, I would possibly have expected Ralston to have been ahead of him just for the fact that he has made a first team contribution this season.
I mean, I can see where you're coming from, but really that's the bit I'm least surprised by is Nathan Patterson retaining his place, because I would argue that he was called up on hype and talent alone for the Euros rather than anything he'd done on a football pitch. So in that sense, it's like, why should we be surprised that a player called up and given starts without having to really play any senior football was, well, again, called up and will probably be given a start without having to play any senior football? I mean, that's where it feels harshest on Ralston for me rather than the O'Donnell argument. But that doesn't mean, as I say, that I'm particularly shocked by that decision.
Yeah, I think O'Donnell is slightly different because I think he has the jersey. I think he's just like, I think he's regarded as the first choice position for that role in the team when he's fit and available. I think I wasn't overly surprised at that one, I would have to say. And I think you could debate the merits of both players, but I think it's very clear that you and I, our opinion matters scant. I think obviously it comes down to the decision making of Steve Clarke, and I think it's fairly evident you know what his thoughts are on that.
Yep, I mean, in a way, and I'm sure many Celtic fans will agree with this sentiment, in a way it's a bonus for the club if anyone doesn't get an international call-up at this stage of the season, you could argue. I mean, Ange Postecoglou has says numerous times that he'd be proud for them all, and I genuinely believe that he would be. But from a practical standpoint, not having some of your key players traipsing across the globe before the run-in in a month with 3 derbies as well is probably a blessing in disguise. I mean, you can't get injured on international duty if you're not on international duty, can you?
Yeah, I think that's the flip side of it. I think that if you're going to search for a benefit, then that would be it. That you're able to wrap a couple of players in cotton wool, or even just allow them to come back if you're carrying any knocks and bruises, which at this point in the season you tend to find most players are. It maybe just offers scope for physical recovery and an opportunity to work on maybe specifics on the training ground or whatever. I'm sure Anthony Ralston probably won't see it like that just now. Yeah. I'm sure he would have loved to have had the opportunity to go and represent his country. What I would say is that he has to be chapping on the door. I think if he hasn't made the cut, you would like to think that it wasn't without consideration, that it wasn't without a bit of thought going into it. And if he sustains the kind of performance levels that you've seen over the last few months at Celtic, then I think he forces himself into the squad just by virtue of how he's playing.
I agree with that. I think it would have been with consideration purely on the basis that he was in the squad and now he's been taken out of the squad rather than wasn't in it and still was getting overlooked, that kind of thing, which is why I think to me it was quite harsh. I can see the arguments. There's a couple of comments coming in that he can't nail down a start at Celtic, which is kind of what you said as well. But I think that's also a wee bit harsh because I've kind of laid out that he's played 15 odd games since. One of the guys in front of him literally doesn't play senior football at all. And it's like at that point the logic becomes a wee bit murky for me. So I think he still will be chapping on the door. It's a friendly first and foremost, so I suppose it's not the end of the world for him. But I would argue that's precisely the time that you would be hoping that he get in and maybe given a longer than 4 minute slot in the team. But hey, he's not in it. I think it's a blessing in disguise, probably, when you consider it from a Celtic point of view. And there are other considerations with international break as well, like people that have been called up. There's still some squads to be named, but earlier this morning, Reo Hatate and Daisen Maeda were both called into the Japan squad for the World Cup qualifiers against Australia, which is March the 24th in Sydney, and then Vietnam, March the 29th in Saitama. So they will be the very definition of traipsing across the globe and back before this crucial April fixture list. Australia, I think it's tomorrow, announcing their squad. So it's likely Tom Rogic will be away to Sydney for that game against Japan and then Saudi Arabia as well. I mean, it seems like an obvious question, Alison, but how important is it that Postecoglou doesn't experience the type of international break he had to deal with back in September? Because there's an argument it could make or break the title race. It's that important. It's not an injury-laden one, isn't it?
Yeah, I think he'll be watching through the cracks of his fingers, to be honest, watching these games because, well, Reo Hatate made an immediate impact when he came in January. Maeda too, who's come straight in and went into the first team. Matt O'Reilly's been called up for the Danish under-21 squad. Another player who's come in and contributed. You're going to have Callum McGregor away on Scotland duty too. I think, yeah, these are all players who are representing international clubs by virtue of what they're doing at club level, and it's indicative of how integral they've been to Celtic that they're called up to. So I think you can ill afford someone coming back with the kind of injury that would basically keep them out of the run-in, and I think that's just the nature of the beast at this point of the season. But I'm sure he'll be he'll just be watching and hoping that all the guys who are away come back in one piece, because if you think of like a Tom Rogic or someone coming back with an injury, it could really put a dent in the squad in terms of going forward for the crucial running.
I mean, there's other, as I say, that there's a lot of teams or squads not been announced yet, but the likes of Carl Starfelt, he might, I mean, you never know, he might get back in the Sweden squad. He's been playing well. I think they actually announced that within the next hour, the Sweden squad. There was an outside call back in the last international break that Cameron Carter-Vickers might get a wee shout for the USA. It didn't happen. They've actually got 3 games this international break, and the last one I think is March the 31st. So a lot of Celtic fans will hope it doesn't happen this time either. But there's plenty. It's just part and parcel, though, isn't it? When you've got a squad full of international quality players, that these things are going to roll around, and if there's a hectic fixture list or a crucial season-defining fixture list afterwards, it's just part and parcel of it.
Yeah, I think it's part of being at a big club. I think for anyone who's at a club that likes to consider themselves at elite level, then these are the problems that you face, and it's a very realistic facet to your season that you're going to have players who are away in international duty. And I think the way the football calendar is going, it's almost a 12-month calendar. There's very little respite now compared to what it would have been some years back. So I think it is just something that you have to factor in, that you have to cope with. And when you're signing players who come from Australia or from Japan, or who you know that you're going to face quite significant travelling duties if they're away in international duty, I think it just becomes part of your sports science network almost of trying to manage it very much as sensibly as you can. And what you tend to find is that these guys go away with a schedule of when to eat, to sleep, to drink, to try and keep them on course to their bodies in the same routine as much as is physically possible, to minimise the impact of jet lag and the fatigue that comes from travelling. But I think there always is an element of it. I think it's inevitable that when you're going through such a grueling travelling journey and really clocking up the miles for the likes of Rogic, Maeda, Hatate, who are doing substantial travelling now over the next few days, I think it's inevitable that when they come back, that you have a lull, that you possibly have a dip in performance, and it's trying to just manage it as sensibly as you can.
I mean, you've also got the likes of Beaton and Abada for Israel. Israel have got 2 games. I think one's in Germany and one's in Israel itself. So there's all of these things. I suppose, to go back to the Scotland thing, I wasn't that surprised that the only Celtic players there were McGregor and Taylor. I don't think Forrest's really been playing enough regularly again to get back in, but I think he probably has that in his own sights. Alison, would you agree that the more that he starts playing for Celtic again, like he has been the last few games, the closer it will become to getting a Scotland return for him as well?
Yeah, without doubt. And I think what he has is that I think Steve Clarke knows what he offers. If memory serves me correct, he did a hat-trick at international level for Scotland. I think if he's fit and playing regularly, I think he would be back in, and I think he would be back in on merit rather than reputation. I think he would be there because he does have something to offer.
We've got a couple of comments here. Borders boy with this one. This actually ties into your opinion piece on the Celtic Way website this morning, on the kind of almost the backhanded compliment of if Carter Vickers ends up choosing to go elsewhere, it will be because he's been so good for Celtic, that kind of thing, because of the teams that are interested in him off the back of that. That kind of ties into this. Borders boy making the comment that they're crazy not selecting him, presumably because he's just been so good for Celtic.
I think he's been very consistent. I think he's played well. I know he played quite a bit of football last season too when he was out on loan, but I think there's been a real consistency to performance, and I think it's maybe all the more impressive when you consider what both Cameron Carter-Vickers and Carl Starfelt walked into at the start of the summer. It was a very chaotic team. I think defensively there was a real brittleness about it. I think there are still elements there that could do with a bit of work, but you've certainly seen a much more solid backline than what you did last season. I think Celtic currently have the best defensive record in the league, and I think you can still see that there's a vulnerability at set pieces and things, but it's certainly much improved from where they were maybe 6 or 7 months ago. And I think playing regularly with the same defensive partner can be a part of that. I think it can help just in terms of fostering an understanding, and also too, you've got a very reliable goalkeeper and a very vocal goalkeeper, which I think is a part of the mix as well. But certainly I think Starfelt too has performed better than maybe some people would imagine. I think he's still open to a bit of criticism. I actually think over the piece, I think he's done not too badly at all.
No, I mean, you know where I stand on the consistency of selection at centre backs. I've kind of harped on about it for months. I think it has been key, but it's also that the right people have got to be in there. And I think Carter Vickers has been the standout of the kind of the two centre backs. But I do agree with you. I think Starfelt's come into a game the longer that he's been there, and he's clearly trying to adapt to what Ange's wanting from his centre backs as well. And that's to his credit. There is still a perception of him that he's got the odd mistake in him. I think statistically he doesn't actually make that many mistakes compared to what the kind of perception of him is. But both of them have actually grown as a partnership together. You heard that when not only when Starfelt was asked about it himself, but when Joe Hart was asked about the defenders in front of him and stuff. And I think that's a big thing to take away. Before we wrap up, I'll put this from Rab McEwen up. If Japan, Scotland, Australia, Sweden and the USA all qualify for the World Cup, Celtic could be sending the B team to the Sydney Cup. I think that's a nice wee light-hearted thing to end on there. I've been saying the last few days, if you like this kind of chat, then you'll probably enjoy the stuff on the website too. So if you go to celticway.co.uk/subscribe, give us a go, see what it's like. That'll be your good deed done for the day, and you'll help keep the Tony Ralston for Scotland recruitment drive in business. So, thanks for your contribution today, Alison, as always, and thanks for your comments, guys, too. See you all tomorrow.
Thank you.